Page 116, Part 9. If profound psychical problems manifest which necessarily require a change so that the psyche is again capable of functioning normally and works in a neutral, positive, equalized form, then various steps are necessary which must be clarified and undertaken. This is the case with both self-treatment as well as with treatment from outside, from a specialist, who must be educated in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. In less difficult cases, self-psychoanalysis may be quite sufficient, which however at any rate requires the necessary knowledge, which naturally also must absolutely be the case with self-psychotherapy. But this is really only valid for cases which do not extend beyond the norm, for which purely positive thinking is still useful and is beneficial as well as successful. It is important to know and to heed that a cognitive restructuring is necessary in any case, regardless of whether it is a simple case which can still be cleared up and resolved through a pure, neutral, positive, equalized thinking, or whether it already deals with a more difficult or even serious case which requires therapeutic help from outside. However, this cognitive restructuring must not only concern perception and thinking, as well as recognition, rather the world of imagination, which is of great significance, must also be involved. Just as much a part of that are the world of ideals, as well as one's feelings and language, which are components of the restructuring process, which are of just as much importance as the memory structures component, which plays an important role in the human being's whole process of life. With the entire process to be undertaken of self-psychotherapeutic analysis and treatment, or analysis and treatment from outside, four fundamental factors must be kept in mind above all, and they are the following. 1. The tracking down of distortions of reality. 2. The recognition of distortions of reality. 3. The creation of a new attitude/conviction and the experience of it and the living of it. 4. The conscious, neutral, positive, equalized changing and new programming of the consciousness, thoughts, feelings, as well as the psyche and subconsciousness. As already explained, cognitive restructuring is necessary in the case of any psychical disorder, disturbance, or illness, and in lesser cases, see the psyche. It can be carried out by means of self-therapy, or in more serious cases it must be carried out with the help of psychotherapeutic specialists. The ultimate Ziel, or goal, or end culmination point, thereby, is the changing of the psychically disturbed human being's wrong and sick attitudes and assessments, which can only be overcome by means of corresponding behavioral therapy, which in easy cases can be carried out by means of self-initiative, see the book The Psyche, or in serious cases must be carried out with the help of psychotherapeutically educated specialists. Factor 1. The first step in psychoanalysis, regardless of whether it is carried out as self-analysis or as outside analysis from a specialist, must consist of fundamentally tracking down those important and most important problem-causing thoughts, and the evaluations and feelings which arise from them, which are unconsciously tended and nurtured, and which operate automatically and throw the psyche into turmoil. It is these automatic thoughts which are the crucial point, because it is through them that the feelings are disturbed, and thereby also the psyche, when they create an influence in a wrong, negating, and only negative form. In this kind, they call forth a more or less dangerous distortion of reality which can contribute to anxieties and depressions. However, clearing this up is not exactly simple. Rather, it requires certain necessary knowledge and the living of the practical experience. The simplest rule thereby for tracking down the thoughts is the precise examination of all the occurring mental, feeling-based, and verbal as well as memory-conditioned symptomatic reactions, which in certain situations manifest as burdensome and problem-creating. One must thereby critically examine which mental unconscious (or conscious) assessments, attitudes, ideals, and imaginations, and so forth, are hidden behind all the forms of behaving, which, self-evidently, are also influenced by feelings of a conscious or unconscious kind. And since everything is initially below the surface and hidden, it cannot always be immediately, obviously recognized, which is why it is very often necessary to first work out helpful techniques which can then be practically and beneficially applied. However, sometimes such techniques can unfortunately only be found with great difficulty. Consequently, they must also be laboriously worked out. If a self-therapy is called for, then a volitional analysis and therapy, which must be consciously carried out, is absolutely necessary. Therefore, one's own initiative and one's own motivation are of decisive significance. However, this initiative and motivation is also required when psychotherapeutic measures from outside are called for. Therefore, interrelated actions are required between the psychically disturbed human being and the psychotherapist. If this interaction from the psychically burdened human being is not there, then, as a rule, it is also impossible for even the most experienced psychoanalyst to track down and recognize the factors which form the problem. The reason for that is that the unconscious thoughts do not reach the surface, namely because no symptomatic reactions and so forth manifest when there is no cooperation from the psychically disturbed person. It is only as a result of certain reactions that the automatic, that is to say unconscious, dysfunctional thoughts and feelings can be tracked down and recognized, to which end, however, the psychically disturbed human being must reach out and therefore be interactive. However, the tracking down of the distortions of reality is thereby still not adequately done for a long time because, just as with self-psychoanalysis and self-psychotherapy, a great initiative on the part of the psychically disturbed human being is also required with the involvement of a psychotherapist because it is actually necessary that a, quote, diary of thoughts and feelings is kept in order to note the conscious thoughts and feelings and those which are unconscious but are becoming conscious in burdensome and problematic situations. The whole matter must correspond to a systematic self-observation, which then, written down, can later be assessed by oneself or by the psychotherapeutic specialist, as a result of which new cognitions are gained. However, right at the start, it must be said that the self-assessment is extraordinarily difficult and, as a rule, not objective. Consequently, particularly in regard to this process of self-cognition, a human being who is psychically disturbed, has a psychical disorder, or who is psychically ill, should enlist the help of a proven psychotherapeutic specialist. Factor 2. If the first factor is directed at tracking down the distortions of reality, then, with the second factor, recognition of the distortions of reality is called for. But the second factor is only possible because of the result of the first factor, which consists of a so-called cognitive restructuring. which creates clarity concerning which disruptive processing mechanisms, unconscious or conscious up to that point, operate when there are arising difficulties. As a rule, those problematic thoughts and feelings are mostly of an unconscious, automatic nature, and exactly these must be recognized after they are tracked down. In large part also to be counted among these unconscious, problematic thoughts and problematic feelings are concealed fundamental convictions and processing procedures which must be recognized and revealed after they are tracked down. As the product of unrealistic and distorted thoughts and feelings, they ultimately impair the psychical health and therefore create a psychical state which is based on detrimental assessments or convictions. And all these factors must be critically examined and recognized after they are tracked down. Therefore, the psychically disturbed human being must learn to recognize all things which distort reality, and he or she must learn to become conscious that, in regard to the psyche, they are of a wrong, disturbing, damaging, and illness-inducing nature. And the psychically disturbed human being must necessarily also learn to free himself or herself from his or her wrong assumptions, thoughts, and feelings, and to no longer be convinced by them. Connected with that at the same time is the working out of new, alternative, and realistic thoughts, through which corresponding feelings are also produced, which influence the burdened psyche and help the human being to consciously work on and overcome his or her specific, emerging, problematic situation better, and for him or her more satisfactorily. However, this is only the second step in the entire process, which is best carried out with the help of a psychotherapeutically schooled person, whereby, however, also nothing stands in the way of self-therapy when there exist the necessary cognitions and powers which are indeed required for that. If that is not the case, then self-therapy is absolutely to be advised against. Factor 3. The processes of all four factors are difficult and lengthy, and as a rule cannot be dealt with in a short time. In fact, each individual process can take many months, or under certain circumstances even years, depending on the seriousness of the psychical illness. Each individual process also requires a great initiative, cooperation, and motivation from the psychically disturbed person, because no success can be achieved without it. However, the actual work of one's own psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, or that provided by a specialist, not only consists of tracking down and recognition and the new working out of a new programming of the consciousness. Rather, it also consists of forming and using new thoughts and feelings. However, precisely this is very difficult when done through one's own initiative and with self-therapy, which does not mean, however, that it will be impossible. But in serious cases of psychical disturbance, one is instead advised to consult a psychotherapeutic specialist. With a good psychotherapy, no specialist can avoid carrying out long and detailed conversations with the psychically ill person in order to clear up all necessary factors and points, and so forth. But that does not mean that only verbal analysis and communications should be used, because along with the conversations, other values which are of enormous significance are also to be taken into consideration. Thus, the psychically ill human being must recognize or be made cognizant of the fact that he or she must examine his or her distorted thinking and his or her wrong convictions in order, by recognizing them, to create new and opposing thoughts and convictions, which then also correspondingly form the world of feelings, and through this, in turn, the psyche. That means that, as a result of the recognition, New thoughts, feelings, and convictions must be created and experienced so that they can actually also be lived. If that is not striven for and worked out, then no alternative assessment can result from which a new life can be determined and tackled. Therefore, it is necessary to recognize the actual facts as well as to live the practical experience of the new thoughts, feelings, and convictions in order to finally bring about a new, healthy form of psyche. The lived experience is therefore the decisive point which finally secures the new convictions which come about as a result of new, healthy, neutral, positive, equalized thoughts and feelings. Therefore, the might of the thoughts is called for because it determines the prosperity and adversity of the human being's psyche and consciousness and subconsciousness, and determines the state of the human being's body. An appropriate portion of self-suggestion or suggestion from a helping person plays just as great a role in this as does intelligence and conversations which contain argument and which are clarifying, empathetic, explanatory, and intelligible, without which a real and successful psychotherapy is not possible. This is necessary help from outside, which naturally does not apply in the case of self-therapy, for which reason such self-therapy is very much more difficult to form because the one engaging in it must study his or her own, quote, I, and fathom, track down, and recognize everything himself or herself in order to then take the necessary steps of cognitive restructuring and have the lived practical experience himself or herself by means of his or her absolute own initiative. Therefore, should a success be granted, the correct actions must follow in any case. But that means that either the necessary conversations must be carried out with a suitable specialist, or that one's own therapy with appropriate cognitions and thoughts, supported by necessary knowledge, can actually be applied, and it means that concrete, new thoughts, feelings, and convictions can be created in any case, without which the living of new practical experiences is impossible. Without neutral positive equalized thoughts, which must be fundamentally newly created, no neutral positive equalized feelings can arise, which must ultimately influence the psyche in a neutral positive equalized way in order to transfer it into this state. Therefore, this must be given the appropriate respect, because only by following newly created, neutral positive equalized thoughts and feelings can new convictions be created, which lead to new practical experiences and to a living of the experiences. From that, it therefore follows that positive thinking is absolutely necessary in order to change a disturbed or sick psychical state for the better, because the might of the thoughts also forms the feelings, which decide the condition of the psyche. Whether the thoughts and feelings are tended and nurtured in conscious or unconscious form thereby makes no difference, as has already been explained several times, because what is important is only the might of the thoughts by means of which everything is called forth and steered. The might of the thoughts is the fundamental factor which decides the prosperity and adversity in those things over which the human being, himself or herself, is the innate master. Therefore, it is not simply the purely intellectual knowledge about one's own psychical disorder and its cause which brings about a change to the thoughts and feelings, as well as to the psyche. Rather, it is the neutral, positive, equalized thinking, and all further factors connected with that, with the resulting outcome of the neutral, positive, equalized change to the feelings. Also belonging, in any respect and without exception, to the further factors connected with the neutral, positive, equalized thinking, is the purpose-directed psychotherapy, which must be based upon a necessary psychoanalysis and at any rate on all necessary knowledge and lived experiences. As a rule, exactly this knowledge and lived experiences are absent in the individual who is psychically burdened, disturbed, or seriously ill, for which reason a self-therapy is very often out of the question, and for that reason, expert psychotherapy is the only true solution. Suitable therapies often directly consist of the problem-creating situations having to really be searched out and having to be lived again and again, so that the psychically suffering human being becomes accurately aware of the experiences from them in such a form that, in the particular situation, no factors appear which could justify a distortion of the facts. Such a procedure can be very useful, especially with anxiety, fear, and panic, if the situations which trigger the anxiety, fear, and panic are indeed consciously brought about in order to live the experience from them, and in order to recognize from that no factors are contained in them which justified anxiety, fear, and panic. The directed living of corresponding practical experiences is thereby actually often all that must be brought about in order to solve the most important points of the problem. The lived practical experience, that is to say, the living of the experience, is the most important component in a health-giving psychotherapy, because this thereby stimulates the neutral positive equalized processes of change which are based on a neutral positive equalized thought and feeling process, without which no improvement can be set in motion. With the process of the living of practical experience, no psychotherapy avoids also having to have in-depth conversations and discussions, which is impossible with self-therapy because the communications, convictions, and ideas from an outsider, which must have a thought-stimulating effect, are absent. Consequently, a psychotherapy which gives help from outside is, in any case, therefore to be preferred over self-therapy, and it is called for if the condition of the psyche extends beyond the norm, where one can still treat and bring it into order oneself. As a rule, on their own, the conversations and discussions and so forth only bring about a part of the whole, which does not mean, however, that these factors can be disregarded, because the conversations and so forth actually have a quite enormous and important significance in the process of truly good psychotherapy. However, with all of this, one must always take care that new practical experiences are created which one must live, because it is fundamentally through them that the health-bringing processes of change towards that which is neutral positive equalized are set in motion. But exactly this is the great difficulty with psychotherapy, because it requires not only the greatest efforts from the psychically disturbed human being, rather also his or her profound motivation, as well as the necessary knowledge and lived practical experiences of the psychotherapeutically helping person. Although a neutral positive equalized thinking is absolutely necessary in psychotherapy, it is not done with the pure positive thinking alone, because, as has been explained many times, the important psychotherapeutic factors are also to be used, which must be worked out through appropriate analyses. Therefore, it is wrong to only want to use solely positive thinking, as the hack writers of books claim in regard to pure positive thinking. Certainly the might of the thoughts remains undiminished in all human beings in all situations, but that does not mean that further methods and steps would not also have to be used if the psyche is so seriously disturbed or sick that help from a third party is required for its recovery. Therefore, the much propagated purely positive thinking must fail if the other necessary steps and an intentional psychotherapy are not also undertaken and carried out. Pure positive thinking is only effective where the psyche is not yet so disturbed that psychotherapeutic help is necessary. If the disorders are already too serious, then without corresponding therapy, pure positive thoughts are unable to create any new, personally communicable thoughts, feelings, and convictions, which could be lived as new practical experiences. Fundamentally, there is no motivation for that. The motivation must first be found by means of a suitable analysis, and then must be formed and implemented by means of corresponding therapy. Therefore, pure positive thinking is completely wrong in such hard cases, and under certain circumstances it is even dangerous, because in such a situation it is actually not able to carry out the necessary examinations of reality, which are necessary in order to recognize the facts of the problem and to grasp the necessary psychotherapeutic measures. In reality, pure positive thoughts in this form obstruct the human being in building up the necessary motivation for the acquisition of new healthy thoughts and feelings, as well as new convictions, whereby consequently the living of new practical experiences is also throttled and prevented. However, if neutral positive equalized thinking is used in association with suitable psychotherapy, then the human being's actual coping possibilities, which slumber in him or her in defiance of his or her psychical illness, become obvious to him or her. Therefore, it does not correspond to a paradox when it is said that pure positive thinking is absolutely damaging in one case, however very helpful in another case, depending on the form in which it is used. Thus, in one case, inappropriately and wrongly, if one builds solely upon pure positive thinking when the psyche is seriously disturbed. In the other case, appropriately and correctly when it is practiced and maintained in association with indispensable, necessary psychotherapy.